A sharp knock broke the quiet before sunrise. The woman inside the tiny room did not answer. The wind scraped loose snow across the porch. The old boarding house settled with a tired groan. Somewhere beyond the window, a horse stamped against frozen ground. Anelise Hartley sat upright beneath a worn wool blanket. One arm rested around her 7-year-old daughter, Liza, who still slept with slow, gentle breaths. Every sound outside made Anelise lift her head, waiting for another knock that never came. What could bring someone to her door before daylight in a town she had not called home for 7 long years? If stories from the old frontier speak to you, stay with this one. The answer waited just beyond that frozen morning. Only yesterday, the stagecoach had rolled across the last ridge before Dustwater. Iron wheels struck frozen ruts until every bone in Anelise's back begged for rest. She kept the blanket wrapped around Liza, while white clouds drifted from the little girl's lips. 7 years had passed since Anelise last saw the town. 7 years filled with hard winters, long roads, and one fresh grave. Liza rubbed sleepy eyes. "Mama, are we almost there?" "Almost," Anelise whispered, smoothing loose brown hair from the child's face. The driver looked over one shoulder. Dustwater still stands. Colder than ever, though. That earned the smallest nod. The town finally appeared below them. Lean buildings leaned against the wind. Smoke climbed from a handful of chimneys. The church steeple still tilted east, just as she remembered. One building caught her eye first. Her father's blacksmith shop. Its forge stood cold. Its chimney reached into the pale sky without a single thread of smoke. Liza pointed. "Is that Grandpa's place?" It was. Nothing more came out. The last letter had reached Missouri 2 winters earlier. Her father was gone. Thomas had refused to let her travel home for the burial. He called the trip improper. She stayed behind, pressing bread dough until flour covered the table, and her hands shook from the effort. Those hands rested quietly now beneath the blanket. The stagecoach stopped outside Morrison's boarding house. Martha Morrison opened the door before anyone knocked. She looked older. More lines crossed her face. Silver touched her hair. Still, her eyes softened when they settled on Liza. "I heard you might return." "I need a room," Anelise said. "Come inside." Warm air carried the smell of wood smoke, cabbage, and fresh bread. The heat touched frozen cheeks. Liza stepped closer to the stove without speaking. Martha filled 2 bowls with stew. "You'll stay as long as needed." Anelise lowered her spoon. "I'll earn my keep. We'll speak of that tomorrow." Night came early. The room upstairs held one narrow bed, one cracked washstand, and one small window covered with frost. Liza fell asleep almost at once. Anelise remained awake. The ceiling creaked. A wagon rolled somewhere beyond the street. Then boots crossed the porch. Slow, measured. They stopped outside her door. Her breathing became shallow. No knock followed. Only silence. Several moments passed before the steps moved away. Morning arrived with pale sunlight spilling across the blanket. Anelise carried water downstairs. The dining room buzzed with quiet voices. Every conversation paused when she entered. Eyes followed her. Some remembered the blacksmith's daughter who always spoke her mind. Others remembered the young bride who rode away beside Thomas Hartley. None knew the woman standing before them now. A broad-shouldered ranch hand near the stove glanced toward the window instead of joining the whispers. His weathered coat carried fresh snow. A deep scar crossed one hand as he wrapped stiff fingers around a coffee cup. Martha noticed Anelise watching. "That is Caleb Mercer. Does he board here?" "Sometimes." Before another word could be spoken, the front door burst open. A frightened boy stumbled inside. "Mr. Morrison's horses are gone." Every chair scraped backward. Caleb stood first. Without asking a single question, he reached for his hat and walked into the freezing wind. Anelise watched from the doorway. Fresh tracks stretched away from town toward the white hills. Caleb stopped only once. He bent down. Touched something half buried beneath the snow. Then he looked straight toward the boarding house. Whatever he had found changed the look on his face. He closed one gloved hand around it and started back at a run. "Lock every door," he shouted. "And keep that little girl away from the windows." Before anyone could ask why, another set of hoofbeats thundered across the frozen valley. Snow lifted behind the approaching riders. Windows rattled. Martha pulled Liza close. Anelise refused to step back. Caleb kept running, clutching the hidden object against his chest, racing fate. Please subscribe if you want to ride with this story to the very end first. The riders reached the edge of town before Caleb crossed the street. Their horses snorted clouds into the cold air. Frost clung to dark coats. Long rifles rested across worn saddles. Nobody stepped outside. Store shutters slammed shut one after another. Caleb reached the boarding house and pushed through the front door. His chest rose hard with each breath. Snow melted from his hat onto the wooden floor. "Bolt it," he said. Martha dropped the heavy bar across the entrance. Anelise looked at the closed fist Caleb held against his coat. "What did you find?" He slowly opened his hand. A silver hairpin rested on his palm. Its tiny blue stone caught the morning light. Anelise stopped moving. She knew that hairpin. Her father had carved the silver flower himself when she turned 16. She had left it inside the blacksmith shop before marrying Thomas. No one outside her family should have carried it away. "Where was it?" Caleb answered without looking away. "Half buried beside fresh horse tracks." The room turned still. Liza stepped closer to her mother. "Mama?" Anelise slipped the hairpin into her pocket before kneeling beside the little girl. "Stay near Mrs. Morrison today." Liza nodded, though questions filled her eyes. Outside, the riders spread through the empty street. Their leader wore a black hat pulled low across his face. He studied each building before stopping outside the old blacksmith shop. One man climbed down and forced open the weathered door. The sound reached everyone inside the boarding house. Wood cracked. Metal scraped. Then silence. Caleb watched through a narrow space between the curtains. "They are searching." "For what?" Martha whispered. "I do not know yet." Another loud crash rolled across town. The men had started pulling apart the forge. Anelise felt her fingers tighten around the silver pin inside her coat. Her father never hid valuables. He always said honest work belonged where every eye could see it. So why would strangers tear apart his shop 7 years after his death? Caleb turned toward her. "Did your father ever speak about keeping something safe?" She slowly shook her head. "He kept letters, tools, nothing more." Before anyone answered, a deep voice sounded outside. "All townsfolk come out." No one moved. The voice came again. "Anyone hiding inside will answer for it." Caleb looked around the room. "There is a cellar." Martha pointed toward a narrow door behind the kitchen. Women gathered children without speaking. Boots pounded across frozen ground outside. A rifle stock struck the boarding house door. Once, twice, 3 times. The wooden frame groaned. Caleb handed Anelise a small revolver. She stared at it. "I cannot." "You may have to." She accepted it with stiff fingers. The cold steel felt heavier than expected. Another strike shook the walls. Liza reached for her mother's hand. Anelise squeezed it gently. "Go with Mrs. Morrison." "I want to stay." "You cannot." Liza hesitated before following Martha toward the cellar steps. Caleb waited until the last child disappeared below. Then he removed a narrow hunting knife from his boot. "If they enter, stay behind me." His voice stayed calm. His hands did not. The pounding stopped. Silence filled every corner of the house. Then came slow footsteps across the porch. Someone tested the locked door. The handle turned. Nothing. Another pause. The footsteps drifted toward the side of the building. Caleb rushed to the nearest window. They found another way. Glass exploded inward. A man climbed through the broken frame with a pistol raised. Caleb hit him before both boots touched the floor. The knife never left his hand. One hard punch sent the stranger crashing across a table. Another rider burst through the shattered window. Anelise lifted the revolver with shaking arms. The barrel pointed toward the ceiling. The rider turned. Their eyes met. His finger tightened around his trigger. A deafening shot filled the room. Smoke rolled through broken glass. The rider staggered backward, not from her bullet. Caleb had thrown a cast-iron skillet from the stove. It struck the man's shoulder with a sharp crack. He fell through the window into the snow. "Move!" Caleb shouted. More riders circled the building. Anelise ran toward the kitchen. The back door flew open. Freezing wind rushed inside. Beyond the fence waited a narrow trail leading behind the church and into the cottonwood trees. Caleb glanced toward the cellar, then toward the growing line of armed men outside. He grabbed Anelise's arm. "There is something beneath your father's shop. How do you know?" "My brother died trying to protect it." Before she could speak again, flames burst through the broken front window, climbing across the curtains while smoke swallowed the room. "Stay with this journey. The hardest road is only beginning." Smoke rolled through the ceiling beams. Burning cloth drifted onto the floor. Heat pushed against the bitter winter air pouring through the broken window. Caleb pulled Anelise toward the back door. "We leave now." She stopped long enough to look toward the cellar. "Martha." The older woman appeared with Liza and the other children close behind. Soot marked every face. Nobody spoke. They hurried into the freezing morning, while sparks climbed above the boarding house roof. The riders spotted them almost at once. "There!" Hoofbeats shook the frozen ground. Caleb pointed toward the cottonwood trees. "Run!" Snow reached their knees. Every step stole another breath. Branches whipped against coats and hats, while bullets snapped through the bare limbs. Liza stumbled. Anelise caught her before she fell. Caleb fired once without slowing. The shot sent the closest rider behind his saddle, buying only a few seconds. They crossed a narrow creek where thin ice cracked beneath their boots. Cold water soaked through leather, but nobody stopped. Beyond the trees stood the old blacksmith shop. Its weathered walls leaned with age. The front door hung open where the strangers had forced it apart. Caleb entered first. The forge lay broken across the floor. Bricks had been pulled away. Ash covered everything. He dropped onto one knee beside the stone foundation. "My brother found a map hidden here years ago." Anelise looked around the ruined shop. "My father never mentioned a map." "He would not." Caleb slid loose stones aside until his fingers disappeared beneath the floor. A small iron ring appeared. He pulled. A square wooden hatch lifted open. Cold air drifted from the darkness below. Liza stared into the opening. "There is a room." Torchlight suddenly flashed through the doorway. The riders had reached the shop. Caleb pushed the hatch wider. Everyone down. Martha climbed first with the children. Anelise followed, holding Liza close. Caleb dropped inside and pulled the hatch shut above them. Darkness swallowed every face. Heavy boots pounded across the floor overhead. Someone shouted. Another man struck the forge with a shovel. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Caleb lit a small lantern. Its weak light revealed a narrow tunnel carved through packed earth. Wooden shelves lined one wall. Old journals rested beside wrapped bundles. Anelise picked up the nearest book. Her father's name covered the first page. She opened it. Inside were careful notes about cattle routes, railroad agents, and payments made by a powerful land company. Several pages carried the same warning. They are taking farms by force. They silence anyone who refuses. Caleb unfolded another bundle. Inside rested signed land deeds belonging to dozens of families from Dustwater. "They stole everything," Martha whispered. A loud crash interrupted her. The hatch above burst open. Sunlight poured into the tunnel. One rider jumped down with his rifle raised. Caleb rushed forward before the man could fire. Both slammed into the dirt wall. The rifle discharged. The blast filled the tunnel. Earth rained from the ceiling. Anelise shoved Liza behind the shelves. The rider reached for a revolver. Anelise stepped forward. She lifted the same pistol Caleb had handed her hours earlier. Her hands still trembled. This time the barrel stayed level. One shot filled the tunnel. The revolver kicked hard. The rider collapsed beside the lantern. Silence returned. Only rough breathing remained. Caleb looked at Anelise for a long moment before gently taking the pistol. "We have to move." They followed the tunnel until daylight appeared ahead. Its hidden exit opened beyond the ridge overlooking Dustwater. Below them, townspeople gathered near the burning boarding house. More riders surrounded the square. The black-hatted leader stood beside his horse, waiting. Caleb handed the journals to Anelise. They came for these. She looked across the valley. Then she looked at the families standing together below. Without another word, she stepped onto the ridge. The cold wind caught her coat as she raised the journals high enough for every eye in town to see. The black-hatted leader turned sharply. His horse lunged forward. So did every rider behind him. Please like, subscribe, and join the next ride across the frontier.